Let's now begin discussion about the joints in us. The structural arrangement of tissue by which bones are joined together are called as joints. So joints are important because they help in connecting the bones with each other. The joints have been classified into three major structural forms, namely the fibrous joints, the cartilaginous joints, and synovial joints. So these are the three major types of joints in us. And yes, the joints are very important for us. They give us flexibility. Without the joints, our body would have been very difficult to move at places. So what are the fibrous joints? The fibrous joints are moreover immovable or fixed. At the skull we have a lot of fibrous joints. So the bones of the skull are not as such movable except for very few. So the fibrous joints are those who do not show any movement due to presence of strong and tough white cartilaginous fibers. As for example, we have the joints in tooth socket and between the skull bones. These are very well fixed and definitely not going to show any movement easily. Thereafter we talk about the cartilaginous joints, which are slightly movable, very less movable. These are important for as they give flexibility to the bony structure present around. But yes, they are not fully movable. At the thoracic cavity we have cartilaginous joints which join the sternum with the ribs. In cartilaginous joints, the bones involved are joined together with the help of cartilages. We know the difference between bone and cartilage. Bone is a very hard structure, whereas cartilage is comparatively soft. So definitely flexibility, enhanced movement, protection from damage, these can be provided by the cartilages. And they're present preferably at those areas which are highly movable, because the movable parts are prone to injury and damage from any external shock. The joint between the adjacent vertebrae in the vertebral column is of this pattern. So the joint between adjacent vertebrae can be an example of cartilaginous joint. Here we can see another example where we see the cartilaginous joint. Let's now talk about the synovial joint. The synovial joints are freely movable joints which are almost perfectly arranged. In this, the bones are not fused with each other. Yes, the bones are not directly fused, but there is a gap between the two bones. And for as the gap contains excellent lubrication, the bones can freely move about one another. The synovial joints are characterized by presence of a fluid-filled synovial cavity. So here we have the synovial cavity. We can see on this image here, this is synovial cavity that is definitely fluid-filled to minimize friction when the bones are moving. Such an arrangement allows considerable movement of nutrients and respiratory gases. So yes, movement of nutrients and respiratory gases become highly facilitated by the synovial joint. Because of the gap, things can diffuse in and out in a much easier way than the other joints such as fibrous joints. So these joints show more lively bones. The joints help in locomotion and definitely many other movements. The synovial joints are surrounded by a tubular articular capsule. So there is an articular capsule, a tubule-like structure, which surround the synovial joint and protect them. Here we can observe the articular capsule here, long extending. Yes, this is the articular capsule which protect the synovial joint. The articular capsule consists of two layers, namely the outer fibrous capsule and inner synovial membrane. So the inner side we have the synovial membrane. Here we can observe on this image. The synovial membrane secretes synovial fluid which lubricates and provides nourishment to articular cartilage. So the synovial membrane, that is the innermost membrane, will release the synovial fluid. The cells of the synovial membrane are specialized in that they can secrete substances and form synovial fluid. And definitely this will nourish the articular cartilage. This is going to be nourished. In old age, stiffness of joints is due to the decrease in synovial fluid. So when the synovial fluid is reduced or almost absent, stiffness of joint can be observed, and moving body parts inflict serious pain for this reason. The structural arrangement of a perfect joint or synovial joint, which we have talked about, permits considerable movement of articulating bones without danger of friction. So synovial joints can provide minimum friction but enhanced movement. Due to the elasticity of the ligaments of the wall of joint capsule, articulating bones automatically return back to the normal position after movement. So there is excellent elasticity of the ligaments of wall of joint capsule. For that, the articulating bones can automatically return back to the normal position once movement is completed. So this is also a very important function of the synovial joint, presence of elastic ligament at the wall of joint capsule. Now the synovial joints are further classified according to their movement they perform. Let us know more about the synovial joints. The synovial joints are further classified according to the movements they permit. So based on the type of movement we can observe in a specific type of synovial joint, it can be classified. So the first one is definitely ball and socket joint, which we can observe between humerus and pectoral girdle. Also between the pelvic girdle and the femur we can observe the ball and socket joint. This allows extensive movement of the bone besides permitting extremely less friction. Thereafter we find the pivot joint, which is present between atlas and axis and also between radius and ulna, which we can observe here on the screen, the pivot joint. The synovial joints are also classified as gliding joint. This is the joint between the carpals. That is why we can actually move the plate of our feet, which you can see here on the screen. The gliding joint also allows gliding movement of the bones associated with it. Thereafter we have the saddle joint. It is the type of joint between carpal and metacarpal of thumb. We have the ellipsoid or condyloid joint also, that is the wrist joint and metacarpophalangeal joint, the joint between metacarpal and phalanges. Let's now understand the different type of synovial joint in the form of a list. We have the ball and socket joint, the hinge joint, which is joint of the knee, the pivot joint between atlas and axis and also between radius and ulna in our body, the gliding joint between the carpals, the saddle joint between carpal and metacarpal of thumb, and ellipsoid or condyloid joint, that is the wrist joint and joint between metacarpals and the phalanges.